Hey, this is Joel Cameron. Thanks for joining me in this video. I'm going to process now the snare drum of this kit. I have just isolated everything so far and processed with some EQ and a little additional gating the bass drum mics. And now I'm going to work on the snare drum. So this is where we are currently. So the snare is a little lackluster. I could turn it up, but it's a little boxy as I start to approach it kind of critically. So using the same idea of subtractive EQ, I'm going to pull out what I don't really care for in that sound. And one thing I can tell you right now that I don't care for is some of the low mid. And so I'm just going to pull back a few dB and start sweeping. Okay, so that's a little above the frequency I need. That's kind of around the area there, but it's a little too dramatic. I can either lessen the amount, or it sounds like I need a narrower Q. From what I'm hearing, I want to still hear some guts and some punch from the snare. So I'm just going to give it a narrower Q. Keep sweeping. That's a little down too low in the guts. You know, it's weird. 313-ish. 315 seems to be a fairly offensive frequency to me. Often, I've heard other people talk about it too. It's just a frequency. A lot of times when you feel like your mix is too bulky, you've lost some headroom, and things are sounding like they're sort of competing a little too much in the mid-range. A lot of times there's a track or two that you could probably pull down around 315 in. This is not a bad start here. Just this gives you a little headroom right here to add. That's cool. I think I'm going to actually roll off a real gentle curve. Right around there, actually. Yeah, there's some low information there that's just not totally necessary in the snare drum. This whole mix is a little hot. I'm going to pull it back some. It's not going to jam as much. I'm sorry, but I want to watch my levels. We can always put, and I will put, before I'm done with this, some compression or some dynamics over the entire kit. So until then, it'll be a little lackluster, but bear with me. Okay, so that's clearer. Now, obviously, it's interesting to be such a slappy sound on the bottom. It's a really thick sound, and you can tell with the two together, there's still some thickness. But without that bottom, it's pretty clear. I do want to add some more attack though. Just as with the bass drum, the snare drum almost always winds up getting some attack before I'm done. And somewhere up around 8K tends to be a pretty good range for adding some attack. Now notice if you go too wide, you know, that's just kind of screwy sounding to me. Sounds like a bad sample. Most of my cuts and boosts are somewhere in the neighborhood of 3, maybe 6 decibels on cuts. And that bottom head is still making this top head feel a little thick to me. Okay, so let's work on the bottom a little bit. Go ahead and insert a plug-in, an EQ, And I can tell you right now, I'm going to pull off some lows because they are getting in the way of this. I'm just going to sweep this up. And don't be afraid to cut a lot. Okay. I'm going to listen to it with the... Now there's no reverb. There's no parallel compression on this kit. There's no, there's a lot of processing that's going to come later that's more overt. I'm hearing enough of the ring of the snare that I don't really feel like I need to compress it much right now. I might wind up later coming back and compressing it. There's kind of a high mid thing that's bugging me on the snare drum too, on this bottom mic. So I'm just sweeping it. Somewhere around there. Actually, that's not bad. You hear the... Now I could tolerate brightening that a little bit. It's not bad. You can just put the kick and snare in together and kind of see what the relationship is between them. They have a similar punch, similar clarity. They belong together on the kit. That's good. Let's listen to them with everything. And let's bypass all the EQ on the kick and snare. Hear the difference? Bass drum's a lot fluffier, indistinct, and the snare's a little too throaty. Put those back on. I could even potentially back that down a hair, the attack on the snare. Could widen that Q a little bit and make it a tad more natural. Maybe not. After a while, you notice when you widen the Q up toward the top, there's that frequency range that adds nice air and nice presence to a snare drum. It tends to be around 7, 8K. If you go a little wide with it, you start affecting like down around 4K, which a really dark snare drum might benefit from some of that. But a snare drum that's already fairly balanced, it just tends to kind of wind up sounding slappy. So I think this is probably a pretty good, safe place to call it quits. That's a good, decent snare drum sound. The relationship of things will change as you begin to bring in more elements, as you begin to process more things. You start, compressing room mics and EQing overheads and things like that. Particularly room mics and overheads, which are not gated. The relationship of how they hear the snare and the other instruments, the toms and stuff, can affect, as you process those, going back and touching up how you process each of the other things. But this is a pretty good start right here, so I'm liking this. And bypass the EQ. And so I added a little bit of attack on the top snare mic, a little bit of attack on the inside kick, and some top that may or may not have really benefited. Take it or leave it on the bottom. It would depend definitely on what else is going on in the mix. But that's a good sound right there. Very present, very clear. And so I will stop there. Thanks for watching this, and please keep on checking back.